Welcome, everyone, to the Institute for Corporate Governance and Ethics Fall 2025 Speaker Series. I'm Todd Haw, Associate Professor of Business Law and Ethics at the Kelley School and the Faculty Director of the ICGE. And I'm thrilled today to be joined by my colleague, Sunil Bedi, who will introduce our speaker, Vikram Bhargava, and his talk, Artificial Intelligence and the Value of Choice, in just a moment. But before I turn things over to Sunil, I'd like to say a quick word about the ICGE. The Institute for Corporate Governance and Ethics was relaunched about a year ago with the aim of taking a broader, more interdisciplinary, and more systems-based approach to corporate governance and ethics research. So not only did we want to ensure that we were considering corporate governance in its full scope, which includes research areas of finance, management, corporate law, corporate compliance, business and behavioral ethics, and financial controls and assurance, but we also wanted to make that research more accessible to business practitioners. So as part of that relaunch, the ICGE brought Ethical Systems, a consortium of business and behavioral ethics scholars, to the Kelley School, which doubled the number of our faculty affiliates and created an entirely new network of collaborators under the ICGE umbrella, as well as a new platform to reach business leaders. So bringing the ICGE and Ethical Systems together has created a one-of-a-kind institution that is able to harness the best academic research to aid scholars, policymakers, business leaders, and students in elevating corporate governance and ethical business practices within their organizations. And this speaker series is just one of the ways that we're doing that. So please check out our websites and LinkedIn for new initiatives and activities coming from the ICGE and Ethical Systems in the future. Now let me introduce the moderator for today's talk, my colleague and ICGE research director, Sunil Bedi. So Sunil is an associate professor of business law and ethics and the Jerome Best Faculty Fellow at the Kelley School. He earned his PhD in marketing and business ethics from Wharton, as well as a JD from Harvard Law School. Prior to joining academia, Sunil worked as a private equity attorney in the international law firm Ropes & Gray. And as a researcher, Sunil's areas of expertise include business law and ethics, intellectual property, and brand strategy. His work often employs multiple methods, including quantitative, philosophical, and experimental, to answer questions that sit at the intersection of law and strategy. His research has been published in top law and ethics journals, including places such as the Cornell Law Review, Southern California Law Review, Vanderbilt Law Review, and Journal of Business Ethics. Sunil is a gifted teacher and sought-after speaker, and he has an incredible ability to engage his audiences around complex areas of law, ethics, and business strategy to explore questions that are foundational and fundamental to business, all while having a good time. And I know we're going to do that same thing today. So with that, Sunil, please take it away.
Thanks, Todd. I'm super excited to be here, and thanks for that very nice intro. So our speaker today is Vikram Bhargava. Dr. Bhargava is an assistant professor of strategic management and public policy at George Washington University School of Business and an international research fellow at Oxford University. He teaches classes in business and public policy and business ethics in the legal environment. Dr. Bhargava is an expert in ethics and the policy of digital technologies, including technology addiction, autonomous vehicles, hiring algorithms, and artificial intelligence, which he'll be talking about to us today. His research has been published in prestigious outlets like Business Ethics Quarterly, Journal of Business Ethics, and the Oxford University Press. He's been featured in news outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Newsweek. He's also the co-editor of the technology section at the Journal of Business Ethics. He has won the Outstanding Undergraduate Faculty Award of the Year at George W. University. Dr. Bhargava received his BA in Economics and Philosophy from Rutgers University and a joint PhD in Philosophy and Ethics and Legal Studies from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. As a friend of mine, I know he's an insightful, interesting, and of course, extremely engaging speaker and teacher, and we're really lucky to have him today. Hi, Vikram. Welcome to ICG.
Hello, Sunil, and hello, Todd. Thank you so much for having me at ICGE today. It is really my pleasure to be here as a part of the institute here, and it's a really exciting future ahead with ICGE. So it's my pleasure to be a part of the future of this organization right now that I think is really doing an important role in universities and practice and sort of the larger business environment. So thank you for having me. I just want to confirm that you can see my screen fully shared.
Yep, we can see it great.
All right, terrific. So today's talk is entitled Artificial Intelligence and the value of choice. Now, in the last 5 years or so, there's been quite a bit of attention that's been drawn to the range of different bad outcomes that can come about due to AI. Now, these have not only been discussed in academic research, for example, race and gender biases, things like bad outcomes coming about due to an algorithmic flash crash. And this has gotten attention even in documentaries and in popular press, as well as, of course, academic research. Now, most of this focuses on the ways in which algorithms can lead to bad outcomes. However, there's now billions of dollars that are pouring into trying to improve these outcomes. So perhaps some of these bad outcomes might be engineered away. So the question, the broader project that I'm undertaking, and the question that I'm interested in is, suppose these bad outcomes, the various different biases, the bad outcomes that might come about due to AI algorithms, are ultimately engineered away. Are there any ethical concerns that remain? That is, even if after these billions of dollars are poured into addressing some of these bad outcomes, are there nevertheless some ethical concerns that persist with our using algorithms in the workplace? And that's the broader question that I'm interested in exploring and what I'll discuss today. And I'm going to explore it in the context of hiring algorithms. And I explore this by starting with this question of why is it that we conduct interviews with one another? Now, interviews, if we were to ask, let's say, a manager why we conduct interviews, the answer is something like, well, we need to be able to predict whether a given candidate is going to meet our job's needs. We're going to predict their performance and fit, broadly construed, both with respect to this kind of tasks that they're undertaking, as well as more broad cultural factors. For example, the extent to which they sort of fit into our organizational ethos, so to speak. Now, this is also the textbook answer. If you were to look at HR textbooks for why it is that organizations conduct interviews, the answer is typically, well, to be able to predict performance and fit. Now, interviews are uncontroversially extremely costly and extremely time consuming. And that's why this justification is offered of why they conduct interviews despite these enormous costs associated with the process. The textbook answer is to predict performance and fit in relation to the job requirements. Now, this, what I call the traditional view of interviewing, I suggest highlights something where the question of why conduct interviews is more difficult than it first seems. And this is because this traditional view of interviewing that we see both in practice as well as in HR scholarship faces two threats. The first is what I call the behavioral threat, and the second is what I call the algorithmic threat. So, in other words, this traditional view of interviewing, that is, that interviewing is for predicting performance and fit, faces two challenges, the behavioral challenge and the algorithmic challenge. And I'll say a little bit more about each of these. So, the behavioral threat is that there's this large body of psychological evidence that suggests that we are not good at predicting performance and fit. Notably, we often think we're good at predicting performance and fit. We feel like, well, if I can interview this person, I'm going to be able to pick up on these subtle human cues that's going to give me a hint of whether this person is going to be good. And this is true even of experts. For example, professors often think that they're going to be able to identify the next hotshot professor, but they can't. This is true even with doctors who think that they might be able to identify, well, who's going to be the next hyper successful surgeon, for example. And they think that interviewing is going to allow them to pick up on these sort of subtle cues. And they think that they're going to be able to do it, but they can't. Now, while there's a whole lot of controversy in many areas of academia, this is one of the areas that's it's fairly uncontroversial that we are not especially good at predicting performance and fit, despite us thinking that we are able to do this. So we're not good at it. Now, you might say, well, what's the alternative? We need to find candidates after all. And well, there is an alternative to us interviewing people. And this alternative is precisely algorithms. Algorithms already have a superior track record of predicting fit than humans, even expert humans in many domains. So as algorithms continue to improve in this realm, they may very well be able to predict performance and fit better than us in many domains they're already able to. And they're also beginning to be adopted more widely in hiring domains as well. Okay, So this, I suggest, presents what I call the interview puzzle. So with a colleague, Purya Asadi, we craft this puzzle to highlight a challenge for this traditional view of interviewing. And it goes something like this. Well, if the traditional view is the whole story, that is, if interviews just are for predicting performance and fit, then it seems the practice is left on feeble grounds. Not only is it extremely costly, but we're also bad at it, and we may have better alternatives. If the traditional view is correct, interviews seem at best an archaic HR practice, or at worst, blatant wastefulness sustained by irrational managerial overconfidence. Now, I'm going to suggest that we should abandon interviews if they are solely about predicting performance and fit, as a traditional view posits. However, interviews are not just about predicting performance and fit, and this is what I'm going to try to argue for here in this talk. Interviews can implicate overlooked ethical values and thus can be worth preserving despite the behavioral and algorithmic threats. In other words, even though these threats do threaten the traditional view of interviewing, there are a broader set of ethical values that are implicated in the choice of us being able to choose with whom we work that remain unscathed by the behavioral and algorithmic threats. Interviews can be vindicated once we see that there are additional values implicated in the practice of interviewing beyond predicting performance and fit. And to make this argument, I build on the Harvard philosopher T.M. Scanlon's account of what he calls the value of choice. In this account, he says that while people often have good reason to want what happens in their lives to depend on the choices they make, that is, on how they respond when presented with alternatives. And Scanlon argues that there are three different kinds of value that are created when we make a choice. I'll briefly illustrate what these types of values are. The first is the instrumental value of choice. So instrumental value is created when my making the choice makes it more likely that an outcome I want comes about or is satisfied. So for example, I'm currently in Tokyo, and when I went to dinner today, my choosing what I wanted to get makes it more likely that whatever food I get is going to satisfy my taste preferences. Similarly, if I'm going to buy a car, my being able to choose the color of the car rather than the dealership sort of using a random color generator makes it more likely that the car ends up looking like the way I like it to. So instrumental value is created in a choice when that choice makes it more likely, that is, it's instrumental toward furthering some end that we want. Now, this is not the only kind of value that's created through a choice. There are also non-instrumental values created through a choice. And one example of this is representative value. Now, representative value is exemplified, for example, where suppose I were to buy my girlfriend a gift. Now, instead of doing this, I say, well, look, let me just give you the money and you buy yourself something. Now, if I were to give my girlfriend the money and she buys herself something, she might be able to better satisfy her preferences. But nevertheless, representative value is lost. This is because my choosing the gift, even if I choose suboptimally with respect to her preferences, has some representative value. It expresses my beliefs, attitudes, and desires toward her. So, although if I were to, for example, just give her the money and she were to spend it on something, she may very well be able to, I suspect quite likely, she would be able to choose something that better satisfies her preferences than were I to choose. But nevertheless, my choosing it has representative value because it expresses my beliefs, desires, and attitudes through the choice, even if the choice I make is suboptimal. And the last kind of value that's created through choice is symbolic value. There are certain kind of choices that adult members of a community are, it would be insulting for them to not be able to make. So for example, there might be a sleep scientist that knows my physiology so well that they're able to tell me exactly when I ought to go to bed. But there is nevertheless something insulting about an adult not being able to choose their own bedtime for themselves. So my being able to make that choice, even if I choose suboptimally, relevant to the sort of relative to the medical doctor's advice, that choice is something that I'm expected to be able to make. There's symbolic value associated with adults in a given moral community being able to make certain kinds of choices. Now let's return to the interviewing context with these three types of value in view. When a choice is abdicated, at least one of these three values are candidates for the value that would be lost. So back to the interviewing context, the instrumental value of choice goes something like this. Well, us choosing who we want to work with makes it more likely that we find a candidate that fits the job's needs, the role and what we're looking for broadly construed. However, the instrumental value is precisely what the traditional view of interviewing focuses on, and the instrumental value is also what is threatened by the behavioral threat and the algorithmic threat. But there are these two broader kinds of value that remain, that are non-instrumental values associated with the choice. Choosing our colleagues may be a way to see features of ourselves manifested in actions and their results. That is, just envision you're sort of recently hired by an organization and you ask your colleagues, your team, while you're at lunch in that first week, well, why did you choose me? And they say, well, I'm not sure, the algorithm told us to. It seems like something is lost. You were hardly chosen. They just sort of deferred their judgment to the algorithm. In other cases, there might be some symbolic value associated with the choice of being able to choose with whom we work. So in certain industries, being able to come back to one's alma mater and recruit from one's alma mater, there's a certain prestige associated with that choice. There's a certain symbolic value associated with making that choice, even if it's suboptimal relative to being able to predict performance and fit. So if we were to, for example, give up the choice of being able to choose with whom we work with through interviewing, we also risk losing this representative and symbolic value. Now, as a quick summary quote of this general account, the reasons people have for wanting outcomes to be dependent on their choices often have to do with the significance that this dependence itself has for them, not merely with its efficacy in promoting some outcomes that are desirable on other grounds. Now, I've discussed this in the context of interviewing, but the broader project that I'm interested in is this question of what remains important for us to do even if AI becomes better than us at doing the thing? That's the broader question that I'm interested in. And I was motivated to sort of pursue this line of questioning in part by the following example. So, a few years ago, tragically, there was a shooting on Michigan State University's campus. And in the wake of the shooting, Vanderbilt University put out a letter of solidarity that I'm, paraphrasing here. They express their condolences. They articulate that we need to stand together. We shouldn't have division in these times. And they generally, express how much of a tragic event it is, and it's important for us to be caring in these times toward one another. And this note that they offered in the wake of this shooting, this deeply kind and compassionate note, there's something that's circled in purple there that they forgot to delete, namely that the note was paraphrased using ChatGPT. And this letter of condolences that they offered, given that they forgot to delete this bit, was met with quite a bit of outrage. People were astonished that they wrote this letter using an LLM. Now, notice the problem here, if you were struck by this, is not that the letter was poorly written. The letter was perfectly well done. Rather, it's that certain outcomes, it doesn't just matter that the outcome is good, but it matters that we bring about the outcome, that our agency is implicated in bringing about the outcome. So the broader kind of project that I'm interested in is, where does it matter that we make the choices, even if AI is able to bring about the outcomes as good as us or even better? The fact that the loss of representative and symbolic value is risked when foregoing interviews generates reason to preserve interviews despite the behavioral or algorithmic threats. To conclude, if the traditional view of interviewing is the whole story, then its justification is undermined by the behavioral and algorithmic threats. However, interviews can be vindicated once we recognize that there are a broader set of values realized through interviewing. Even if bad algorithmic outcomes are ultimately engineered away, for example, let's suppose the fairness related issues associated with algorithms are ultimately addressed, it still doesn't settle the question of whether managers should abdicate certain choices to algorithms. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I welcome your questions, suggestions, and objections.
Thank you, Vikram. We appreciate you taking the time to tell us your thesis here. And I think it's quite fascinating, but also provocative. We have a lot of questions in the chat. And for those of you who are here, would like to ask more questions, please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will do our best to get to all of them. My first question here that comes from the chat, Vic, is sort of it might not be fair or it might be annoying to you, but let's say AI is also good at the things that you're saying it's not good at, right? So what if AI is good at, we know it can be good at the instrumental stuff, but what if it gets good at the non-instrumental stuff? It gets good at, making the manager feel like they're actually making the choice through whatever sort of choice architecture engineering. And it also gets really good at figuring out the symbolic aspect of making choice. What happens if AI gets so good that it actually can do both those things, or maybe it can't?
Thank you for that question. It's a very intriguing thought, and I don't think that I have any sort of in principle reason to say that it won't be able to do many of the things comparably well, even things that it's relatively deficient at right now. It's sort of notoriously hard to predict when it might be able to sort of do those things adequately well, whatever the questioner is referring to in particular. But let me say, the question actually brings out perhaps something core to what I'm interested in here, which is that certain choices we make, certain experiences, even if they're compositionally equivalent, I think that there is something lost. It's fundamentally inauthentic, for example, even if an AI is able to write a very human-like condolences letter, it's not a real expression of condolences. Now, it's not just in the context of letters. So, in terms of music experiences, I very much like the singer Norah Jones. Now, it's quite possible that AI is going to be able to replicate Norah Jones's voice and create the experience of going to a concert using, let's say, different VR experiences and so on. That's almost exactly like, if not exactly like, going to a Norah Jones concert. But nevertheless, I haven't, in fact, seen Norah Jones. I haven't seen the actual Norah Jones, even if it seems exactly like it. So part of what I'm getting at here is, there's certain kind of experiences where our agency also matters. Now, this Norah Jones point is more about the authenticity one, same with the letter. But the kind of example, I can give you a different kind of example here is that, AI decades ago was better than humans at chess. Now, when you go to coffee shops, you might see humans playing chess with one another. Now, you might say, well, of course, this is the interpersonal component. That is, I think, true, but it's not just the interpersonal component. So if we were to go to a coffee shop with our chess sets and we were to ask AI to make the moves for us, it seems like something is lost there. We are not, in fact, playing chess. We're just, even if we're doing a worse job than had AI told us which moves to make, it's not us playing chess, it's it playing chess. So basically, what I'm trying to characterize here is that there's certain things that the question that I'm interested in at the broadest level, and one I think that is important for us to confront, although there's this range of important work being done in AI ethics about all these bad outcomes, given the sheer amount of resources that are going into attempting to address some of these bad outcomes, the questions that I think are really going to be critical that we'll face is, well, what is important for us to continue to do, even if AI is better than us at it?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Vikram. I appreciate it. Here's another question. So if it turns out that AI is not good at sort of maybe some of these non-instrumental values that you say we ought to sort of promote, what is it good at least in the interviewing context? If a manager is like, all right, I guess I should just throw out AI, that can't be right? AI is efficient. AI is being used. So in what ways is it useful such that it doesn't infringe upon these non-instrumental values? How would a manager use AI effectively in your account?
Sure, it's an important question. I mean, I think that I don't want to sort of romanticize human interviewing either. I'm trying to capture that, there is this element that we might lose something, and we shouldn't just sort of bulldoze forward without a full view of that. And I don't even want to also say that, well, we should interview in all different cases. In some cases, it could be that the instrumental value is so important that it
Hmm.
swamps these other considerations.
Hmm.
So, for example, if an algorithm is able to much more, at a much better rate, identify airline pilots that are much safer, I think that that instrumental significance may very well swamp these other considerations. So there's certain kinds of roles where it might be more suitable, where interviews continue to matter, and I'm happy to discuss that further. Now, the kinds of areas where I think algorithms in some ways have an advantage. Some people might think of this as a disadvantage. Is they're less sort of moved by the fleeting emotional experiences of our moment to moment life, where they're not sort of, they're not algorithms are not going to be hangry, so to speak. There are a range of different background experiences that influence our choices in a range of different contexts. Interviewing is one of them, but as many of the audience members know, we see this even in criminal justice. We see different kinds of sentencing outcomes depending on when the judge ate lunch, for example, or when the person was sentenced. So, I think these sort of you know there are a lot of different ways in which we're affected by things that are, not quite in our immediate awareness. And we also, we do end up when we interview one another, we often find people who sort of people that we just like, and who we like may not always be who would be in fact best for the role. So I think there's, a range of different ways in which there are clearly advantages, including efficiency related advantages with algorithms. I just want to suggest that perhaps, especially in contexts where there is some degree of relational accountability, where somebody comes to you and says, well, you know, let's say, for example, in the case of a firing algorithm, which, nobody would admit to be using, but, the rumor has it that some organizations use a firing algorithm. And, I'm fired by Sunil Bedi, and I go to Sunil and I say, Sunil, what happened here? I thought things were going well. And Sunil tells me, I don't know. I thought things were going well too, but it told me to fire you. It seems like something is lost there when these kind of choices where we are sort of giving reasons to one another are abdicated.
Well, I would find reasons, Vikram, if I had to fire you. I promise. No problem. Okay, so you raise, and there's been some questions in the chat about this. You raised this notion of hiring airline pilots, and it made me think of something that I think will be useful for managers who are sort of thinking through this question of what's the optimal amount of AI and the optimal amount of human interaction. So what is the decision-making process? Is there sort of certain types of roles that lend themselves better to sort of the AI algorithm, others that do not? How should a manager think about allocating sort of AI or human interaction to a decision to hire somebody?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll say two things on this. The first is, notwithstanding the the amount of many of the companies that sell hiring algorithms are ones that certainly um, speak glowingly about the predictive power of their algorithms. I think that there is significantly more research that is required to see the extent to which this is in fact the case, and research that's done by independent organizations where they have the relevant kind of data to be able to make that judgment decisively. But assuming that these hiring algorithms are in fact superior to us being able to make these choices, I think that there is a problem that is sometimes overlooked that I'll highlight. And this is one of the things that I notice when I've sort of spoken at, let's say, strategy conferences, or when I've spoken to, at other business leaders and policymakers about how businesses ought to use AI in their organizations. One of the most common threads that people point to now is that, well, people should use AI as a tool to sort of make help inform their judgments and sort of pick and that the human oversight is of course there. The human is still making the ultimate choice, but the AI is informing their choice. They're sort of working with AI to make these judgments. Now, I think that this line is certainly tempting, but I think at least faces one important problem, which psychologists call the broken leg problem. And this is the idea that with any statistical predictive model, even very simple ones, if you pick and choose when to follow it, you lose the aggregate benefits of the algorithm. So let me give an example of this. So it's called the broken leg problem because if we come up with a very simple predictive rule that tries to predict when the professor is going to go to the movie theater, and suppose this predictive algorithm, the output is it's Thursday, the professor is going to go to the movie theater. And then the next Thursday rolls around, and we predict the professor is going to be at the movie theater. The next Thursday rolls around, we predict the professor is going to be at the movie theater. The next Thursday rolls around, but I know that the professor broke his leg. Should I still predict that the professor is going to be at the movie theater? Well, no, their leg is broken. They're going to be bedridden at home. So I should defect from the algorithm. The trouble is that humans end up thinking that there are many more broken legs than there in fact are. We end up seeing things as exceptions that are not in fact exceptions. So you see this even with surgical decision assistance systems. So for example, if a surgeon is being given certain advice by an algorithm, and the surgeon sees, well, look, this is clearly wrong. I'm going to override this advice. I certainly would want my surgeon to do that, it seems. But the trouble is that the surgeon ends up seeing more things that are exceptional than in fact is the case. So to get the aggregate benefits of the algorithms, you can't pick and choose when you use it. And this I think presents a significant problem that I haven't heard an especially satisfactory response to, because to get the aggregate predictive power of the hiring algorithms, if you are deciding when to follow and when not to follow its judgments, you're overriding the sort of predictive power of the algorithm. So I'm not sure, perhaps there is a satisfactory response that I'm not aware of, but this I think is a challenge to this sort of hopeful idea that, well, we can sort of mix and match and get the best of both worlds.
That's helpful. Thank you. Okay, so I want to not pushback is not the right word, but I want to sort of pin you down a little bit more on sort of descriptively, can you give me a sort of set of job descriptions you think that would be important to take into consideration these non-instrumental values? And maybe that's unfair to put you on the spot, but that's what we do here at ICGE. And so can you just give me, you gave me one, right? So you gave me this notion of airline pilots, which makes sense. And maybe surgeons might be one of them. I would imagine a lot of jobs where human life is at stake. But what about other jobs where human life isn't at stake? So maybe a computer programmer. Ironically, is that something we could just use AI and just look at the instrumental value? Or are there other considerations, you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a sort of exhaustive account that can kind of neatly taxonomize this, but let me say a little bit. So, at least in Western societies, this is going to be sort of culturally contingent, of course, our ability to choose our friends really is something that, well, it could be an algorithm tells you who you should be friends with, but there's something important to us being able to choose our friends. This is true even with our romantic partners. Many of us choose romantic partners suboptimally. This is something that is sort of widespread, but nevertheless, choosing one's romantic partner is something that is important for many. Now, our workplace relationships are not trivial. They are an important source of community. They have significant effects in terms of mental health. And they, of course, are important for a range of different workplace performance related outcomes as well. Now, I suspect the kind of realms in which these non-instrumental values are probably going to take on heightened significance are those realms precisely where the kind of relationships where they are not just, a sort of one specific task, but a broad range of tasks that are much more relational in the orientation of the work, both in terms of their colleagues, their immediate colleagues in their organizations, as well as relational externally. So I suspect that in the kinds of jobs, many sort of corporate jobs where it's not, a narrowly defined set of tasks, but a much broader, expansive set of tasks, largely involving relationships. These are the kinds of realms where I think that the non-instrumental considerations will continue to be important. And of course, there may be some kind of tasks which are just so narrowly defined in terms of their tasks that the instrumental value is sort of obviously swamps the other considerations.
Okay, so I think that makes sense, and I think that when thinking about sort of the trade-off between these values, partly we have to look at cost, and as you said previously, interviews are costly, right? And interviewing without algorithms is even more costly. Flying somebody out to a location, putting them up in a hotel. What if a company, Vikram, is like, we're just not interested in that. We don't care about these two values. We just care about sort of the instrumental value. It seems like a lot of what you're focusing on is the person making the choice. What if the person making the choice doesn't have any interest in this? Is there still sort of an argument that, well, we shouldn't just defer to AI, maybe for the interviewee or for the sort of a benefit of the business as a whole, even if the interviewer, the manager, is like, I have no interest in doing this?
Yeah, it's an important question that you bring up. Let me sort of touch on 2 points. So the first is, I think we should be I think that we should the question of where the costs will land, though, right now I assume that the algorithms are going to be more efficient in terms of the sort of immediate interview process. Insofar as us being able to be chosen itself improves, for example, our sense of identification with the organization. And this, let's say, improves our identifying, sort of having these attitudes that people kind of point to as improving how closely committed they are to an organization. Insofar as being chosen can improve these outcomes, then I think there are these broader kind of considerations that are still worth studying to see what the empirical effects are in terms of performance. That is, if I learn that, okay, well, it's not like they really chose me, it just sort of was an algorithm that outputted a certain number, versus, no, actually, these people really want me there. And if that changes my degree of commitment to the organization and what I sort of the extent to which I bring myself to the workplace, so to speak, this may have certain positive economic effects also. Now, I don't want to sort of rest the case on that. I do think that also that there are reasons for the employee to care about this. Now, uh, many of us who've, for example, taught undergraduates in the last there hasn't been a single class, I think, in the last 5 years where I haven't had students who are interviewed on their first few rounds by sort of the video AI software. And many sort of faculty members at universities are often surprised by this and often don't know that this is happening. And students are sometimes told that they have the option of whether to go with an AI interview or a human or whether they prefer not to. But many of them, of course, don't feel adequately empowered to make that choice. They feel like it's going to negatively affect their job prospects were they to turn down the AI interview. Now, they currently report, and this is just anecdotal, that it's quite an awkward, uncomfortable process for them, that they're sort of speaking into this screen, being evaluated by this AI algorithm. They're not quite sure what's going on behind the scenes, so to speak. And indeed, the creators of the algorithms, as is now well known, the algorithms are often opaque, and they themselves may not be aware of precisely what sort of parameters are being used to evaluate candidates. The last thing that I'll mention on this front, in terms of the candidate side of things, because you're quite right that interviews are also extremely costly and onerous for the candidates. I just didn't focus on that in this particular talk, is that it may have some implications for the justification for the broader practice that we have in the United States of the presumption of employment at will. Now, the employment at will presumption, as many of the audience members undoubtedly know, is that employers can fire an employee for good reason, bad reason, or no reason at all. But similarly, employees can quit for good reason, bad reason, or no reason at all. And this practice is thought to be, at least in part, justified by the fact that, well, look, these are two informed, consenting adult parties. Let them decide whether they want to enter this. However, to the extent that only AI is used in hiring, it renders this initial decision starkly asymmetric in terms of how much the candidate is able to learn about the firm when they're entering this relationship. If they are not able to learn at all about what the firm is like, what the people are like, et cetera, and they're just sort of fed an algorithmic output, and the firm's algorithms, however, are able to learn a whole lot about the candidate, they're no longer on even remotely on a par informational footing, and it's not clear that certainly the candidates are able to enter this relationship as an informed choice.
So let me ask you this, and this is sort of a broader. I want to go broader, and then we'll go narrower again. If we're thinking about technology and how technology influences hiring at large, not just interviewing, but whether it's sifting through resumes or whatever it may be. Do you view that, or do you view that it's an important to sort of think about for a manager the various sort of technological changes that have happened? So here's a couple of technological changes. Be curious to hear what your thoughts on those are. One is most of what we do now is Zoom. That's what you're not here, you're in Tokyo. That changes things, I imagine, right? You're not here, I maybe can't read your body language as much. A manager can't sort of figure out what someone's doing. Maybe, people don't even wear pants when they do interviews, right? They're just in pajamas because it's only chest up or whatever it may be. So that's one thing. The fact that we aren't interviewing in person, does that have a sort of a wrinkle for your account? And the second thing is, and I think a lot of students do this, I see this on TikTok. I'll out myself as someone who watches TikTok a lot, but students are putting in questions in ChatGPT during interviews, right? So then the responder isn't even really giving themselves, right? They are also using AI. So how do these two uses of technology sort of interact with your account of how we ought to be doing interviews?
Yeah, it's a good and it's sort of it provides a helpful moment to sort of look back on some of the changes and look to the future. So let me actually look to the sort of future. I came across this recent comic strip, and in this comic strip there is there's a there's a person telling his wife, "Look, I can just type in these 3 lines, and it could turn it into a 3-paragraph email." That's on one side. On the other side of the comic, there's this person telling his wife, "Look, I could take this 3-paragraph email and turn it into 3 lines for me to read." Now, at some point, I think we sort of need to wrestle with the question of what is the point of us doing this if neither party is in fact, uh, you know, fully engaging with one another. And I think that you're quite right that we do need a more granular account of the kinds of things that 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 let's say are that it makes sense to automate, or the kinds of things that technological advances don't, for example, corrupt important values. And this is in some ways what I'm trying to call for, which is a little bit more granularity. So to give you an example, I grew up in the generation where I did not need to memorize square root tables. I'm delighted that I did not need to memorize square root tables. And there are many different things that I'm thrilled were automated. And there are things that, I sort of come to this talk with some degree of nervousness, because I recognize that there are many different kinds of technologies that we on the front end might have had some aversion to, that we have quickly come to adopt and be comfortable with. For example, uh, people used to be nervous to get on elevators if there wasn't an elevator operator to press the button or pull the lever on their behalf. And of course, now, you'll see 3-year-olds run into an elevator and press the button comfortably. So I think you raise an important point here. And what I would say is, I think that there are certain choices where even though we are already doing the thing, it's not clear to me that we haven't lost something. So we, for example, may very well now only text our closest friends and never speak to them on the phone, or perhaps never even see them in real life. Now, this, of course, is expedient in many ways, but perhaps we have lost something there, even though this is something that we are now doing. Now, I think the Zoom question is interesting because in a lot of ways, of course, it's sort of, it's a source of live debate. And indeed, we are on Zoom right now and it's facilitated by it. And it allows for a range of different, benefits, including these kind of, international conversations. But there is a reason, I think, at least, that some organizations are finding that they want their employees to be in person, at least in part. Of course, many people push back on this. And I think that I would want to sort of extrapolate past the employment context. Something that we're getting at here is more generally human in terms of our relationships, our friendships, our romances, our marriages. We wouldn't be okay, I think, with doing them exclusively through a Zoom mode. Why is that? And that is in some ways, I think, important for us to face, even though, of course, that's not the world that we're currently living in, where all of our relationships are, for example, through VR goggles. But I don't see why there isn't a possibility of being able to do that. And the things that I think are worth wrestling with are, all right, well, let's suppose we are able to do these things extremely efficiently. But what is lost? Efficiency is not the only value that's there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think so the way you characterize at the end, efficiency is not sort of the only thing. I see two other sort of, values, not in the sense of as you talk about the interview values, but we've had a couple questions about agency, that there is something valuable about human agency, which I think is what you're getting at. And then sort of what you were talking about at the end there was maybe there's something valuable about human interaction, right? And I wonder, do you view these things as different, agency versus interaction? And do you view them as sort of equivalent? I guess if they're different, are they equivalent in terms of value? Or are they sort of tied together? This notion of, well, it's a human that made the choice, so the human that went through the interaction of doing it. And there's actually a sort of Zoom, non-computer interaction. We are face to face. Do you view those sort of as different, the same? How do they play into sort of how we interact with AI and interact with technology?
Great. Yeah, I'm excited to hear that question, in part because I think that agency really is the crux of the matter. And I think it is somewhat different from mere interaction. To return to the sort of chess example, if we're sitting at a coffee shop, letting the AI tell us what to move, what pieces to move, there is a human interaction there. But our agency isn't the thing that is deciding what choices to make there. So I think in a lot of ways, the key issue is what remains important for us, for our agency to be implicated in bringing about the outcome, not just the outcome. So thank you. I think that's quite perceptive and apt.
Good. Thank you to the person who asked the question. Unfortunately, it wasn't me, Vikram. I wasn't insightful enough to do that. Okay, let me ask you this. Let's go a little bit more granular, and then we'll come back out to help you conclude in a little bit. So the non-instrumental values that you talk about, and let's not just talk about in terms of hiring, or just in general, right? There are non-instrumental values. We want to, as you've said, agency is important. Also, interactions are important. But you started off the talk by telling us that we get it wrong a lot, right? When managers make decisions, whether those decisions of hiring, firing, promoting, we get it wrong. We have biases. My colleague here, Todd, is very, very well sort of situated in those behavioral ethics biases that we face. So it seems like what you're saying, if let's see, I'm going to be a little bit cold about it, is who cares that you're really bad at doing this? Just do it anyways because it's important to do it. Is that a fair, I mean, maybe it's not a fair characterization, but how would you respond to that if someone's like, but I'm bad at it? So if I'm bad at it and I know people are bad at it, the research has said we're bad at it, why are you telling me that I should be doing it?
Yeah, it's an important challenge. Let me say first that I I certainly don't I don't mean to sort of imply that it's worth endorsing the biases that infect our hiring judgments. Of course, that's not the case. Uh, I also what I would want to characterize is basically that many of our relationships with one another have these rough edges. And part of relating with one another may very well be these rough edges as a sort of consequence, as a sort of it's not like we're aiming at the roughness of the edges in our interpersonal relationship with one another, but perhaps that is just what it is to have human relationships with one another. That even in our friendship realms, in our romantic realms, that if we were to have utterly unimpeachable, just flawless interactions, that certainly doesn't seem like a relationship that any of us recognize. And these are the relationships that we value most deeply. Efficiency seems decidedly the wrong type of lens when viewing friendship or romantic relationships. If you're sort of thinking of, okay, well, what's a more efficient way to have this romantic or friendship interaction? In some ways, you're not experiencing the friendship or the romance in the relevant kind of sense. Uh, so I think that efficiency is an important consideration, and I think that to the extent that we are able to sort of, I would strongly endorse, the if there's research that is going to be able to help us mitigate these judgments, these sort of biases in our choices that we make with one another, I certainly think those are important to undertake. I think that there is some research that I recall, though Todd might be able to correct me on this, that mere sometimes awareness of our biases makes us more prone to those
Hmm.
acting on those biases as well. So I'm not quite sure how to navigate that hiccup as well. But this is all to say, I think that these biases are real concerns, especially when they are sort of institutionalized, and I think that they are certainly worth trying to address. But like in many realms of interpersonal relationships, there is a sort of plurality of different values at stake, and there is some judgment that's involved in thinking about, what else might we lose in our attempt to sort of uh, rid our relationships entirely
Hmm.
of their rough
Hmm.
edges.
Okay, so let me give you one more question, and then maybe I'll give you a chance to sort of sum up exactly what sort of you want a manager or any of a practitioner to sort of take away. So here's a question. I think it's a little more broad, and it really brings up on what you said. You kind of said that you did say that we have these rough edges in our relationships, and one way maybe you could think about AI is that AI and technology is sort of smoothing this out. And it seems like what you're saying is we ought to sort of take sort of stock of some of this friction because some of this friction is good. So let's say I buy your account. I'm a manager, I buy the account, and I'm like, okay, I get it. This is important. But how do I convince others, right? They may not read your paper. They may not be deeply engaged in Scanlon, although I think it's very compelling. What is a way that me as a manager or me as a person can sort of get others to see that, listen, smoothing out these rough edges isn't all what is important. These rough edges are important. Human agency is important, and human interaction is important, particularly in the hiring context or any context.
Yeah, I it is, managers face a challenge. There's tremendous competitive pressures that they face when they see their competitors, for example, using hiring algorithms. Undoubtedly, that they're going to be under, very significant pressures, and I don't want to be dismissive of those. I think what I would say is that uh, many many of us recognize and resonate with the idea of, well, I was chosen at this organization. Uh, I was chosen. When I interviewed there, they sort of, for whatever set of reasons, they thought that, well, actually, they want me here, that I am a part of this team. Now, there's this massive body of literature about teams, about workplace culture, and so on. And in this literature, there's a sense in which I think, you know, when you are telling candidates that we chose you, it's not just an algorithm that, output a judgment here that we're deferring to. I think that there is something distinctive there that you can tell candidates also. Now, I don't know, it's an open empirical question, the extent to which this gives them an economic edge, but I suspect that there are going to be some people, at least, and some sizable amount of people who want to be in organizations where they were picked and not just organizations where, a certain algorithm output a number, an opaque algorithm. They're not exactly sure why they were picked. The firm doesn't know exactly why they were picked, and they're a part of this organization. They don't know if the people that they're working with, in fact, like them or saw promise in them. And I think that many of us value at least having some sense of the people we're working with wanted us there and chose us to be there. And I think that on the other hand, also, I think that there's returning to the point about the candidates, I think there's something to be able to on the candidate side to be able to be attracted to organizations where they know that, well, hey, I can come into this organization and interact with a person and affect their judgment and not just, for example, be subject to a sort of a set of predictive cues. And I think that that might be something that is a selling point, so to speak. But of course, that requires much more empirical research to make that case decisively.
Sure. Well, I'll rest assured, Vikram, you were not chosen by an AI. We chose you, and we really appreciate the sort of time you've taken. If you want to take 30 seconds and just sort of recap the conversation or recap what you'd like people to take away from this talk, this would be the time.
Sure. There's now a lot of attention in AI ethics in the popular press about the various different bad outcomes that can come about due to AI, biases of various different sort, uh, really surprising, overlooked bad outcomes that can come about when the algorithms go awry. Now, there's also billions of dollars that are pouring into improving these technologies, and many of these problems may very well be addressed, perhaps in the near future, if not the near future, at some point soon. Now, when we address some of these bad outcomes, we still face the question of, well, should we use the algorithm? And I suggest that in some cases, this issue uh, of should we use the algorithm, there may be some cases that even if the algorithm is better than us, and even if the algorithm doesn't lead to various different biases, there may nevertheless be something important that's lost were we to abdicate that choice to an algorithm. So more
Wonderful.
succinctly, I think that even if there are engineering solutions to a lot of the problems, some choices will remain important for managers to do. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Vikram. Thank you, Sunil. It was a great discussion, a really timely one. Obviously, as you know, every company that we're in, that you hear about, and institutions of higher learning as well, are really headlong diving into AI and really trying to understand kind of the contours of not only what those guardrails should be, but how managers should think about them. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone listening today. Don't forget, we've got a whole slate of speakers. This is just the first of many this semester, and then transitioning into the spring semester. So we'll be talking about everything from ESG to AI to corporate controls and assurance and everything in between. So we don't tend to do this the first week of each month through both semesters. So just check out the websites, ICGE, Ethical Systems, and also our LinkedIn profile, and you'll see all the schedule coming up. So thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate it. Thanks, Vic.
Thank you very much.